there's no psychological model, there's no pharmacological model, we don't know how to increase conscientiousness. You know, you might think that when you give kids with attention deficit disorder Ritalin, for example, that might make them more conscientious. But, well, first, there's no evidence for that because Ritalin is an amphetamine, and that would make them more extroverted, generally speaking, because it's a dopaminergic agent. And plus, there's no evidence whatsoever that if you follow up people who have ADHD who are on Ritalin in the long run, that the Ritalin does them any good whatsoever. In fact, the evidence is actually the reverse, is that the long-term consequences of Ritalin use are negative rather than positive. So, now, it's worse in our lab. Like, we've done all sorts of things to try to measure conscientiousness. So, one of the things we did, for example, because we thought of it as a kind of persistence, you know, maybe like conscientious people will persist at boring tasks longer than non-conscientious people. Sounds reasonable, right? Because, you know, it sounds like you're kind of grabbing yourself and saying, focus on this and don't be distracted. It has nothing to do with whether you're interested in it. So we had people do things like, we made lines and lines of N's and M's and U's, and we had people count the U's, which is pretty boring, you know, and it's also difficult because N's and M's and U's look a lot the same. And all that we found was that intelligence predicted it. Smarter people could do it more accurately and faster, right? No correlation whatsoever with conscientiousness. We couldn't get a correlation with any prefrontal tests, no IQ tests, and then we used tests that were associated with the orbital frontal cortex, which is sort of lower and a little bit more hooked into the limbic system, and we couldn't find any correlation between conscientiousness and performance on those tests either. We looked at like 200 different performance measures, and conscientiousness didn't predict any of them. We can't get people who are conscientious to do something better in a lab than people who aren't conscientious, and it's a real puzzle because, you know, because it's such an important predictor of things like long-term life success and performance and political affiliation. You'd think that you'd be able to discriminate between people who are conscientious and people who aren't conscientious in the lab. But I know that the chair of our department has recently used some attentional tasks and showed a differentiation between conscientious people and unconscientious people. And so I'm hoping that I'm going to follow up with her to find out exactly what that is. But, I mean, it's been deadly difficult. So, you know, the references for all this are at the end of the slides, by the way, so I'm not going to go through the complete references, but a researcher named Roberts has defined conscientiousness as the tendency to be planful, organized, task and goal-oriented, self-controlled, and to delay gratification, and to follow norms and rules. So, we looked at things too, like future discounting, you know, so future discounting, we could play a future discounting game, so I'll do that with you very quickly. So I'm going to point at you and ask you a question. And so you can, it's not a trick, by the way, so you don't have to worry about your answer. So I might say, okay, here's the deal. I can give you $10 today, or I can give you $15 in a month. What would you take?
$15 in a month.
Okay, so fine. I give you $15 today, or $50 in a year.
15 today.
15 today, okay. I'll give you $5 today, or $50 in a year. Okay, so now imagine that I played that game with one of you 100 times, say, or 200 times, using different amounts, small and big, over different time frames. And what you can calculate is how much people value the present compared to the future. Now, you should value the present a bit more than the future, right? Why? That's right, the future is uncertain, so you have to discount it. So, because, you know, there's some probability that it isn't just going to occur, like maybe something will happen, or maybe I won't be here, and then the farther out you go into the future, the more you have to discount it because it becomes really unpredictable. And, you know, my experience, and I don't really know of any data to support this, but my experience has been that it's pretty hard to plan, in your life, it's pretty hard to plan more than 3 to 5 years into the future, because there's so many variables that start to, the effect of the variables that you're not accounting for starts to become exponential as you move out into the future. So you should discount the future because the present is more certain. Plus, if you have $5 now, you can do something with it right now instead of waiting for 2 years to get your 50, and so that might be useful. But we thought that maybe conscientious people would discount the future less than unconscientious people, right? It sounds like they would, because it's sort of like delay of gratification. Can you wait for your $50? And we found that there was no correlation whatsoever with conscientiousness. If people were extroverted, or if you made them happy, then they discounted the future more. And the way we interpreted that was that, well, if things are going well now, you might as well capitalize on it. You know, because if all the signals that are coming towards you say, well, this is a good time, why not take the resources now and use them? So, anyways, that's just an example of how tricky this is. And you'll notice, if you know anything about prefrontal cortical function theories, that all of these descriptions, planful, organized, task and goal-oriented, and so on, have been attributed to the prefrontal cortex. But we sure haven't found any evidence for that, even though it's the prime theory of prefrontal function.